On a fog-slick hillside above Di Poland, the ruins of St. Casimir's Seminary rot beneath black pines. In 1907, 14 novices vanished during Lent. Weeks later, villagers found a bound manuscript stitched into the flayed back of a student, its pages inked with hymns written backward. Church records called it a blasphemous forgery and sealed all files until 2130. I've unearthed fragments of the diaries, smuggled from Vatican archives. Comment your country if you're brave enough to hear what they buried in sacred ground. Off the snow came quiet to St. Casimir's, the kind that muffled scenes instead of covering them. It clung not to the rooftops but to the broken teeth of its spires, dusting the chapel's stones with a whiteness that felt more like bone than frost. Inside, silence nested deep, not peaceful, but preserved, as if even sound had forgotten how to kneel here. Sister Dominka did not kneel. She stood where the altar had once bled incense and absolution, her veil clutched in one hand like a severed wing. Her other hand trembled at her side, fingers stained with ink that had not dried in 40 years. The winter light through the shattered rose window scattered color across her face, red across her mouth, green over her eyes, a starburst of yellow on her throat, as if the glass still believed in resurrection. She did not. Behind her, pews had rotted into splinters, their backs etched by generations of knuckles grinding penance into wood. The candles along the eastern wall had not held flame since the child vanished, yet wax still hung from their mouths like frozen tears, drip-stitched into the stone like a priest's final confession. Dominka stepped carefully, not from reverence, but fear of memory, the kind of memory that shifts underfoot when disturbed. Dust stirred as her boot found the loose tile again, the one with the hairline crack beneath the choir's old bench. It groaned, same as it had the night they sewed the boy shut. She should have stopped them, but in the old books, obedience was stitched deeper than truth. She knelt now, not to pray, but to lift the edge of the altar cloth. It was damp with mildew, yellowed from years of hidden rain, and beneath it, something pulsed faintly in the air. Not movement, but a memory exhaling, the kind of breath that carries the scent of candle soot and sterilized needles. The diary was still there, bound in what had once been calfskin, though no one who touched it believed that anymore. Its cover was stitched in a thread too coarse, too wiry, not sinew, not flax. Hair, child's hair, coarse with dirt, braided like rosary string and pulled through flesh until it held. The church called it apocryphal, a fabrication. They sealed the case when the boy died with hymns still lodged in his throat. Dominka opened the book. The pages fluttered backward, as if resisting forward time. The ink, once black, had swollen, purple like bruises under water. She turned to the first page, where the hymn began. Not with a note, but a diagram of the tongue. She remembered his mouth, how he bit down on the metal crucifix when they tried to purify him, how the blood from his gums mixed with oil, how his mother sang louder to drown the sound, how, after, they found threads in his teeth. "I did not pull the needle," she whispered. "I only held his hand." The words vanished into the stone. The icons on the wall, cracked saints, whose faces had long flaked into anonymity, seemed to watch her more clearly now. One, a depiction of St. John of the Silence, had lost his eyes entirely. Only 2 scorched sockets remained. But somehow they followed her hand as she turned the page. Further in, the writing curved erratically, backwards and down the margins. Verses wound in spirals, as if the writer had forgotten how lines moved. Some pages were damp with dried milk, a stain Dominka remembered too well. She recalled the child's hunger when they isolated him, how he screamed for 3 days, then stopped. The priest said the silence was holy, but she had seen how his lips moved still, singing to something only he could hear. A lullaby sewn under the floorboards. She once thought it madness. Now she wondered if madness was just truth without permission. She reached the final page. It was blank, but not empty. The paper bulged beneath the surface, as if hiding something sewn just beneath the skin. She pressed lightly. It gave. Her breath hitched. She looked up, and the window above her flickered not with light, but with a shadow that did not belong to her. She turned sharply. No one. Only the wind, playing the loose chain of the censer like a lullaby. Still, the presence pressed in, not evil, but expectant, as if the chapel itself waited to be heard, or forgiven. Dominka stood slowly. Her legs ached in a way they hadn't in years, not from age, but memory returning to muscle. She walked past the ruined baptismal font, where algae bloomed green and thick, and paused before the choir gate. There, on the floor, lay the robe. She hadn't seen it when she entered. White, child-sized, stitched with red thread at the collar. Not red, maroon, dried. She knelt again not to pray, and lifted the robe. A thread trailed from the hem, thin as hair. She tugged gently. It resisted. Beneath the robe, the stone had been carved a circle, maybe 6 inches across, and inside it, a cross with teeth at each end. She had seen that sigil once, in a margin of the boy's drawings. He called it the mouth of God. She tugged again. The thread pulled free. A soft, wet sound followed, and then a whisper, not heard, but felt. Dominka, not a voice, a breath inside her breath. She dropped the robe. Blood bloomed where the thread had unspooled, not hers. It crept from the stones, slow and deliberate, forming letters she dared not read. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, only the taste of iron. Like biting a communion wafer dipped in rust, she stumbled back. The book still lay open on the altar, its pages fluttering without wind. One by one, they turned to the back, then stopped. The thread from the robe slithered toward it, dragging itself like a worm returning to its root. She ran not far, only to the door. It was nailed shut. She hadn't seen the nails when she came. In old iron, hand-forged, the kind they used on coffins. Her hands shook as she reached for them, but before she touched the wood, she saw it, carved into the inside of the door, a single phrase. They baptized it, not him. She sank to the floor, veil falling from her hand, hair spilling like unspooled thread. Her lips moved, a hymn, not one she remembered learning, but her hands knew it. They rose to her chest, fingers tracing an invisible needle. The stained glass above her cracked. One note, just one, rang from the old bell tower. It hadn't rung in 40 years. Then silence again, deeper this time, hungrier. Outside, snow fell. Inside, the thread kept moving. The church called it a forgery, but the boy's teeth still hold the thread. The first time Whittled noticed the ash, he mistook it for snow blown in from the sacristy door, grey, fine, melting to touch. But snow did not smear like that. It did not cling beneath the nails or leave the scent of burnt wool on the fingertips. It was November, 1907. The seminary bell rang dull in the throat of morning fog, and the choir boys' breaths hung in the air like incense offered too early. The chapel at St. Casimir's always held a damp cold, a buried cold, one that no fire seemed able to lift, the kind that crept up from the flagstones and settled in the ribs like guilt. Whittled was 16, red-knuckled from candle duty, and, already learning which truths were kept outside the hymnal, he had noticed the soft knocking beneath the choir stalls for mornings in a row. At first, he told himself it was the pipes, then the rats, then the devil, testing him. But on the 5th morning, when he bent to replace the votive cups and heard a low breath catch beneath the oak boards, something older than reason moved inside him. It sounded like a child trying not to cry. He had told Father Antoni quietly, with humility. The priest had not lifted his eyes from the ledger. "It's only the building settling," he said. "Pray louder." So Whittled prayed, not for peace but for stillness, for the sound to go away. But it didn't. Instead, he began to notice its rhythms, always at matins, never at vespers, always beneath the same third stall, the one beside the cracked tile that never held polish. When he walked past it, his breath always caught, like crossing a grave not marked with a name. He tried not to look, but something in the grain of the wood suggested pressure from below, not pressing outward, but folding inward, like something pulling chapel into crypt. The holy water stung that week. It bubbled faintly when disturbed, and the boys began dipping fingers fast and wiping them on sleeves. No one spoke of it, but Whittled saw it, the thin grey scum that floated in the bowl's center like a film of old breath. One morning, just before Lord's, a soft line of ash led from the dormitory stair to the choir. Bare, fine prints, toes too small for any novice, too wide for shoes. The ash did not smudge. It clung to the marble like memory clings to skin, stubborn, silent, shaped by weight, not fully understood. Whittled followed the prints. He did not mean to, but his feet moved before his resolve could object. Past the chapel doors, past the pews, where cracked hymnals had been left open to the same page for weeks, to the locked crypt door beneath the apse, a door that hadn't opened. Since the fire, he did not know all the details, only fragments whispered during laundry duty. A child, a punishment, a rope that wasn't blessed, a hymn that didn't end. And the fire brief, controlled, blamed on candles, but the stain still warped the door's lower edge, as if the flame had tried to escape back out. The footprints stopped there, no return trail, only arrival. When Witold told Brother Marek what he saw, the monk spat once and muttered something about soot and superstition. Faith, he said, requires blindness, not curiosity. Then he struck a match to light the Vesper candles, but the flame bent sideways, away from the crucifix, as if refusing its blessing. That night, Witold could not sleep. He lay on the third cot from the door, just beneath the window that never fully latched. The wind carried smells from the old chimney, smoke, wax, something bitterer. He dreamed of ropes soaked in milk, of children with tongues stitched into him, of hands reaching up through choir stalls, not to grasp, but to pray. When he awoke, the soles of his feet were black with ash. He wept in silence, mouth closed, breath shallow. He did not move until bells rang prime. The next morning, the choir sang the Sanctus with more strain than usual. Voices cracked on the high notes. Witold's own voice rasped raw, like something had been scraped from his throat in sleep. During the final refrain, he dropped his hymnal. It fell open to a page he did not recognize. No number, no title, only a circle drawn in pale ink, with 5 points like an open mouth, and beneath it, the phrase, "Ut in sine vocet, even in ash it calls." When he looked up, the third choir stall was empty. No one remembered who usually sat there. Witold felt it then, the pressure beneath his knees, like the boards below the stall had sighed, or shifted, or breathed. He left the chapel shaking. His vestments clung too tight. His mouth was dry with the taste of old smoke. In the hallway, a nun passed without meeting his eye. Her veil dusted faintly with ashdot in the refectory. No one spoke. That night, the knocking returned, louder, rhythmic, less like settling timber, more like breath against wood. Witold counted. The beats, 3, pause, 2, pause, 1, like someone remembering how to be noticed. He prayed louder, louder still, then something knocked back once. Not beneath the stall. Beneath his bed, he sat up, heart hammering, listened. Nothing. Only the old dormitory pipes groaning, or whispering. He did not sleep. Instead, he watched the ceiling through the thin moonlight, which came broken through the frost-latticed glass. It made shapes of things, a veil falling, a cradle overturned, a small rope hung gently on a peg. In the early morning, before the bells, he rose, dressed in silence, and followed the ash. The prints were fresh, leading not from the dormitory, now, but from the altar itself across the chapel floor, beneath the candle racks, toward the old crypt door. There, at its base, a single footprint remained, pressed deeper than before. Still warm. Witold reached for the handle. It did not turn, but it did rattle. From inside. Once he stepped back, something behind the door exhaled, a long, thin breath. Then silence, but it had weight. He turned away, heart cold, yet not in fear. In knowing, the next morning they found Witold's hymnal sewn shut, each page bound to the next with red thread. His name inside had been blackened, not crossed out, not erased. Burnt. He never returned to the choir. No one asked why. The ash remained for a week, then stopped, but sometimes beneath the third stall, the boards still shift. Ash never settles where a child still walks. The fast began beneath a sky, the color of unwashed linen. No snow that lent, only wind and the bitter scrape of soot, drifting down from the old smokestacks beyond the seminary wall. At St. Casimir's even silence had a taste, like old wax and bondust, licked across the teeth and swallowed during prayer. Brother Elias kept count. 14 novices entered the season with shaved heads and stitched names in the collars of their sacks. They lined the chapel pews in 2 rows, eyes down, mouths open only in song. They walked the cloisters barefoot. They kissed the stones when told. They bled quietly when corrected. One vanished the first Sunday. His cot was empty. At matins, no noise, no blood, no name spoken. But at the foot of the bed, folded like a relic, lay a length of wet linen, and wrapped inside, a rosary still damp from something that was not water. The beads were carved from bone. His name, Yannick, was scratched into the final bead with a broken quill. The older brother said nothing. Elias asked Father Domian, seasonal attrition. The priest said, "Some boys do not take to silence." But the linen smelled like milk gone sour, and the bone bead hummed faintly when held in the hand too long. The next Sunday, another bed was empty, another cloth, another rosary, each time the same, no struggle, number note, no farewell. Each time, the same silence. Elias began to dream of hollow mouths. In the dreams, he wandered the chapel barefoot, robes soaked to the knees, the hymnals humming without breath. He saw boys he knew, their lips moving behind stitched veils, saying nothing. They held candles that dripped wax into their palms, unmoving, eyes locked on the altar as if waiting for something that would not bless them. When he woke, the taste of ash lingered on his tongue. He kept count anyway. 3, 4, 5. The wet linen always folded the same, the rosary always missing its crucifix. The priests burned the cloths in the old hearth behind the infirmary, muttering verses not found in the common hymnal. Once, Elias heard Father Casper misstep in Latin, and bite his tongue so hard the blood ran down his chin. He did not apologize. On the 6th week, Elias found black wax pooled at the foot of the choir stall. No candle had been burned there since Epiphany, but the wax was warm, and in it, pressed like a footprint, was the shape of small toes. 5. Left foot, slightly turned inward. He did not tell anyone. He only prayed harder, not for salvation, but for forgetfulness. Outside, the villagers whispered. They spoke of midnight processions with no lanterns, of hooded shapes moving between the trees, of ropes that hung not from gallows but from cradles. They said the choir sang without mouths, that the chapel bell rang at hours no one kept. They were warned not to look, so they listened instead. Elias asked Brother Marcin if the bell had rung at midnight. No, Marcin said too quickly, but there was soot beneath his fingernails, and the sleeve of his robe was wet. On the 7th Sunday, Elias rose before the bells. The dormitory was quiet. The air smelled of iron and mildew. He stepped softly, feet bare, over the stone floor. Where the 7th cot should have been, there was only an indentation in the mattress, and the linen, perfectly folded, resting on the center. The rosary inside this one had a thread of hair knotted through each bead, brown, coarse, still, damp. Elias wept then, not from grief, but from recognition. He had dreamt this hair before. He no longer knew which dreams were his. That morning at Mass, the choir sang the Dies Irae off key. Voices cracked. One boy sobbed into the Kyrie. Another dropped his hymnal and would not bend to pick it up. Father Domian struck the altar with his cane and told them to sing louder. Louder, he said, until the dead cannot be heard. Elias stared at the choir stalls. The floor beneath them groaned, but no one moved. A small handprint, smudged in soot, marked the back of the pew in front of him. He reached out, but when he blinked, it was gone. Weeks bled. 8, 9, 10. Each Sunday, a name lost. A rosary left no questions, only echoes. The 13th boy vanished the night of Palm Sunday. The linen was heavier. The rosary inside it burned the skin. Elias dropped it as if stung, and the bead that bore the name cracked clean in half. Inside the split, he saw a drop of wax, and inside the wax, a single baby tooth, curled like a seed. He did not touch it again. He asked to see the parish logs. Father Domian refused. He asked again. This time the priest smiled. It was the kind of smile that carries too many teeth. The church, he said, does not bury the obedient, it elevates them. But the boys, Elias began, were never here. The final week of Lent came cloaked in wind. The chapel shutters beat all night, and the tower bell rang once, though no rope was pulled. Elias sat alone in the dark, the cots around him empty but for their ghosts. He prayed with his mouth closed. In the morning, all 14 beds were stripped. Even his in their place stood a single wooden crib, empty. Its slats were bound with rosary chains, the mattress soaked in milk, and hanging above it, a small linen veil stitched with the names of all the missing boys, but the names ran backward, as if someone had sewn the memory out of them. The choir sang that morning without voices, only mouths moved. Elias watched, and wept, and did not move when Father Domian walked past him and brushed his shoulder with the tip of a wet, blackened candle. That night, Elias left the seminary grounds for the first time in 6 years. He walked until the chapel bell no longer reached him. He never spoke again, but the stains on his bed never left. What would you confess if your mouth wasn't stitched shut? She had stopped speaking the year the bells rang backward. That's how her granddaughter remembered it. Not with stories, with silences. Long wet silences that smelled faintly of copper and beeswax, and which grew longest when Palm Sunday drew near. She would sit near the hearth with her veil unwound, a scarf knotted at the throat, like it had to hold something in. The gull Magdale learned early not to ask, only to listen to what was not said. But one evening, when the wind blew against the old thatched roof, like wings brushing rafters, the silence broke. "You know what they put in the font?" the old woman whispered. But Magda looked up from her stitching. "They said it was milk, but it wasn't." Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep without another word. The air turned sour with it. The memory had never left Magda, not through the war, not through the famine, and not when she found the old journal buried in the kitchen hearth, stitched shut with a thread that burned if pulled too hard. The front page bore no name, only an icon drawn in water stain, a cradle above a bell. But in her dreams, Magda saw her grandmother's eyes staring from the surface of still milk, unblinking. The record said 1913 St. Casimir's Chapel. She went back there only once. The village had changed, of course, but the chapel remained, cracked stone and ivy wrought, ironwork twisted like hands in prayer, statues of saints whose faces had melted in the fire. It had not been consecrated since the incident, as the parish referred to it now. The document had been marked by the Vatican as optical anomaly. Marginalia noted photographic damage, weather warping, and, strangely, lactation, hallucination. The font still stood dry, but the edges were stained ivory. Magda leaned close. It smelled sweet, clotted like something kept too long beneath a child's bed. Her grandmother had been 9 that year, one of the altar girls, chosen to carry parmash in a silver spoon. The nuns made her wear a linen robe, too big for her shoulders. The sleeves trailed behind her like ropes in water. She had held the spoon with both hands, her fingers raw from scrubbing cradles not used in years. On Palm Sunday morning, the bells rang before sunrise, but wrong. Not louder, not faster, backward. The peals fell in reverse sequence, as though time had cracked its neck and turned away. The villagers said it sounded like crying from inside stone. The priest never acknowledged it. But from that day forward, no one dared walk past the chapel alone. Her grandmother had described the font in only a whisper. They covered it that morning, said it had been repainted, but cloth doesn't hide smell. When she was told to fetch a hymnal, she had passed the font and caught the edge of the veil lifting. What she saw, she would not say, but Magda remembered her pulling the covers up to her chin and murmuring, "It had a skin, like cream left too long." It breathed once. In the journal, a single passage was not crossed out. Palm Sunday, milk warm, no reflection. We did not speak, we did not drink, but she did. They made her, said it would wash the noise away. She never made a sound again, but the milk remembered her. Magda closed the journal and touched the edge of the font with her fingertip. It pulsed. The light through the broken stained glass turned the milk-colored stone crimson. She turned and left, but the air clung to her. In curdled silence later that night, she dreamt of processions she was forbidden to witness. Veiled girls walking backward, veils soaked to transparency, feet bare, hymnals sewn shut, rope dragging behind like bridal trains. In their arms, cradles, some empty, some not. She woke with the smell of scorched linen in her throat. She called the archive office the next morning. St. Casimir's had burned a second time. In 1942, records transferred, stored beneath the archdiocese's dormitory. Access restricted, classification, visual contamination, potential heresy. No further comment, the voice said. But a week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, only a photograph, blurry, overexposed, of the chapel font, and beside it, a girl. Her face had been erased, not blurred, erased. Her hands were submerged. The milk in the font had curled around her wrists like sleeves, lifting as if greeting her, and from her mouth a line of thread, red, pulled taut between lips and font, like a leash made from silence. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "She tasted it once. She said it remembered her." Magda dropped the photo. For a moment, it looked wet. That night, she returned to her grandmother's old room. The hearth still held the faintest scent of burning thread. Beneath the bed, the tiles were cracked. The pattern looked like a cradle, or a mouth. She lay awake and listened for bells. At 3:17 a.m., they rang backwards 3 times. No rope moved, no wind stirred, only the sound of warm liquid running thick. The next morning, the chapel door was open. Magda stood at the threshold, breath visible though no cold touched her. Inside, the font was full. Milk, still warm, still on the surface. A handprint, child-sized fingertips curled inward like it had just pushed up from beneath. She stepped closer, and there, floating just beneath the surface, a red thread. The end of it vanished into the milk. It moved as if pulled. She turned to leave, but the door had shut behind her. No wind, no latch, just pressure. A sound behind her, then like lace being torn. She turned back to the font. The surface had broken, not spilled, broken, like something beneath it had taken breath. The milk recoiled, then stilled. She heard her name, whispered, in her grandmother's voice. She ran, but the taste followed her. She woke with it, days later. The taste of warm milk, metallic, sweet, unwanted. And from the corner of her mouth, a red thread pulled tight. She tasted the milk once. She said it remembered her. Father Tomasz had not meant to listen twice. The phonograph had been sealed behind plaster in the vestry wall, wrapped in a child's choir robe, billowed, stiff, and still bearing the faint outline of 2 wet handprints. Across the chest, he found it while overseeing the chapel's crumbling renovations. 1931. The workers refused to touch it. They said the robe, HUMMED. At first, he thought it was only wind slipping through the leaded glass, or superstition, stirred up by the ash-scented air and rotting hymnals. But when he lifted the cylinder from beneath the folded cloth, his hands trembled. Not from fear, from recognition. Someone had carved a word along the wax casing with a needle. Sursum, but backwards. No date, no label, just that scratched as if in confession. Tomasz waited until the bell tower slept. He lit 2 candles, placed them beside the old Edison recorder, and locked the vestry door. Dust danced through the warm wax light like breath, not yet claimed. By mouth he slipped the cylinder onto the player. The needle dropped. Static. Then music, but not in any key he knew. The hymn was slow, stretched notes dragging behind like coffins on cloth. The melody clung to the ear like oil. It was not sung, it was exhaled. And beneath it, soft as thread pulled through damp linen, something whispered high, fragile. He turned the crank slower. The whisper sharpened, not Latin, not prayer names, and then, not words at all but cries. At first, Tomasz thought they were the groans of wax worn thin, but when he pressed his ear close, he felt his own jaw begin to ache, as if remembering a scream it had once swallowed. He recorded what he heard. The second time he listened, the bell rang. It was not the hour. It rang once, then again, then 13 times, but the tower only held 8 steps. He looked up. The rope did not move, yet the bell's voice shook the plaster, not loud, but wrong, like something trying to ring forward through its own echo. The phonograph needle jumped, and in that static rattle, the name Elias rose, spoken not with mouth, but with bell. Tomasz shut it off. The wax on the candles had begun to pull sideways, as if leaning away from the recorder. The next morning, he brought the cylinder to the diocesan office. He was told, no further analysis required. He asked if they had heard the voice beneath the hymn. They said, the building has poor acoustics, that is all. He returned to the chapel that night. The phonograph was gone. Only the robe remained, but now, embroidered over the old choir crest, was a stitch of red thread. 1 line, down the center. As if sealing a mouth shut. Tomasz began to speak less. He recorded sermons that drifted into silence halfway through. He forgot prayers mid-verse. The children whispered that his mouth moved even when he slept, as if reciting backward liturgy. Beneath his breath, he no longer rang the bell, but it rang. Always 13 times. Even on days without service, the villagers began leaving notes at the chapel door, instead of attending mass. Pages torn from hymnals, little teeth, wrapped in cloth. Once, a cracked wax bead carved with the word Mama. All left in silence. Tomasz wept, not out of grief, but memory, because he began to remember something he had never lived. He remembered standing barefoot in milk. He remembered the font full, rippling like breath. He remembered hands pushing from Beneath the surface he remembered bells ringing backward, and always was that same cry threaded beneath the sound. A child's voice, but aged, distorted, as if the cry had been buried too long and could no longer fit the mouth that made it. He sealed the chapel. He swallowed the key. He kept the robe. The diocese exiled him 2 weeks later for psychological attrition and auditory fixation. He left willingly, but before he went, he buried the second recording beneath the choir stall. Inside the new wax, 13 reversed notes, a dirge played backward. At the highest frequency, nearly undetectable, a child sobs, and a bell answers. You don't unring a bell when it was never meant to ring forward. They escorted him down without speaking. 1 torch, 2 guards. The corridor narrowed the deeper they went, stone breathing, damp and ancient along the vaulted ribs. It was said the air changed past the 6th arch, became thinner, older, as if memory itself curdled the oxygen. By the time they reached the archive door, the flame bent backward. The archivist was waiting, an albino woman in rust-colored robes that reached the floor. Her eyes did not blink. Her mouth stayed slightly parted, as if holding a verse it refused to release. She did not welcome him. She pointed. The room was longer than it was wide. Ceiling, lost in shadow. No windows. Only rows of blackened filing cabinets, each tagged with charred parchment and sealed in thick red wax. The seals bled when the light hit them just so. He was told he could read for 1 hour. No copying. No transcription. No speaking the names aloud. Only memory. And that, too, she warned, may not remain intact. They don't forget. Gently, she whispered, tapping 1 long nail against the first drawer. These psalms. They fracture minds. The thread isn't just literal. He asked nothing. She left. Silence hung. Not silence. Breathing from beneath the floorboards. Wet, small, like lungs just learning the idea of air. He opened the drawer. The file was stitched closed, red thread, too tight to cut without tearing the document. The title had been scorched into the cover, Oratio Sacramenti Film, the needle offering. He ran his thumb along the seam. The parchment twitched. He inhaled, and with trembling fingers, began to unpick it thread by thread until the folio opened with a dry gasp. Like a mouth exhumed, the testimony inside was fragmented. Entire lines, struck through in black pitch. Names reduced to initials. Whole paragraphs reversed, as if the ink remembered itself backward. But between the burn marks and seals, something survived. A rite held beneath the main altar. Children stripped of name and sound, kept silent for 40 nights. They were not taught scripture. They were sewn it. Each hymn committed to skin through puncture and pull. The veil must enter the flesh. The text read, only then may the tongue receive the unseen word. He turned the page. A sketch. A child kneeling, back arched, thread pulled from their shoulder to jaw. Lips punctured into a stitched psalm. The caption beneath. She sang without voice. The angels understood. He blinked, and for a moment, only a moment, the parchment looked wet. The thread shimmered, like milk-slick skin. The room felt closer now, like it had inhaled him. He turned another page. The ink blurred, but a final phrase was legible. This psalm was offered. The tongue was not returned. He looked away. A cabinet across the room had begun to hum. Low, faint, a psalm without melody, dissonant, fractured like glass tapped by a fork. He stepped toward it. Slowly, the lock was rusted, but cracked open when he touched it, like bone softened. From within. Inside, an altar cloth, frayed, mottled. Not fabric. Flesh. The stench bloomed slowly, thick and iron-rich, like milk curdled on a grave. He unrolled it. Threaded into its weave were teeth. Small. Each, incisor stitched at the root, each molar marked with a number. He counted 14 before his stomach turned. At the cloth's center, a single word had been embroidered in what looked like hurricane. He heard the breath again, not from beneath. From above. He looked up. Cracked icons peered from between. Vaultstones, faces warped from heat, expressions caught between pain and prayer. Behind one, a single eye blinked shut. He closed the drawer. The psalm did not stop humming. He returned to the folio. At the back was a page completely blackened, but the ink still rose above the parchment like dried blood. Something had been sewn into it. Not words. Thread. He touched it. It pulsed. He recoiled, and the cabinet behind him slammed shut on its own. The air changed. He turned. The archivist was standing there. A thin smile touched her lips, but not her eyes. "Now you understand," she said. He nodded, but something inside him had already loosened. She gestured for the folio. He handed it back, but not before slipping a single thread barely visible from the corner of the page, and tucking it inside his sleeve. She watched him do it. She said nothing, only whispered, "Not all psalms are sung. Some are sown." He left the archive and never spoke of it again. But months later, in the quiet hours before sleep, he found himself mouthing verses he did not remember learning. His gums ached, and in his dreams a bell rang in reverse, while a child's voice wept through the needle's eye. They didn't bury her name, they baptized it. The boy had no name in the ledger, only a single initial L, and a date, April 3rd, 1911. Next to it, a faint sketch of a circle with 7 beads beneath. The ink had bled, or perhaps it had wept. They unearthed him at dawn. The monastery ground had grown soft from spring thaw. A team of hired diggers worked in silence, not out of reverence, but because they'd been told too much sound would sink the grave further. The soil did not behave. It moved like breath, collapsing inward with each spade, as if resisting exhumation. When the coffin finally came up, it was smaller than they expected. Child-size. The wood had warped. Symbols carved in reverse dotted the lid crude, as if by a hand too small or shaking. A single strand of rosary beads dangled from the latch, its cross missing. The thread-stained ochre. The priest, who led the team, said nothing. His gloves were already on. He opened the casket, and everyone fell still. The skeleton was intact, but threaded through each vertebrate, top to tail, was a rosary bead, bone pierced cleanly, one per disc, each ivory orb in perfect alignment, like a second spine made of prayer. The cord shimmered with mildew and age, but had not snapped. It pulsed faintly, as if remembering one of the diggers. Vomited. The priest whispered a Latin blessing, but the words stuck. His tongue felt dry, brittle. The beads, he noticed, were not all alike. Some were polished, others chipped. 2 had teeth marks. At the base of the spine, a final bead hung loose, larger, darker, almost black. Carved into it was a single word, barely legible beneath decay. Obla tum. Offered. They wrapped the remains in linen, careful not to disturb the threading. It took 2 days to reach the diocesan archive. By then, none of the team spoke, only the novices. Diary was preserved, barely legible, charred at the edges as if it had once been discarded in a fire, then rescued halfway. The ink was faint, looping, fragile, but the confession was intact. "I do not want a tongue if it cannot be used to soothe him. Let them thread my prayers where no voice escapes. I will not scream, I will not beg, I will become the rosary." 1 page later. "Tonight they brought the cord. Sister said it once belonged to St. Apolline. It was still wet. I knelt. I did not cry. I felt each bead enter. Each one said something to me. I forgot my name, but the Hail Marys remembered it. When they pulled the thread through my spine, I saw God's face. It looked like mine, but it wept. He had signed only with the same initial, L. No surname. Beneath the signature, a small ink drawing, a child with his back turned, rosary beads. Like wings, the archivist who catalogued the remains was later found unresponsive in the vestry. No visible wounds, just a soft humming heard in her throat, and blood beneath her fingernails, clutched into her own spine. Official records labeled the remains as symbolic, martyrdom, but the villagers knew better. They called it the corded prayer. Some nights, if you stood near the chapel wall and placed your ear against the stone, you could hear it, not weeping, not chanting. Just the soft sound of beads sliding through bone, and beneath that, breathless amen. Spoken without a tongue, they prayed, with his spine, and the prayers never stopped. They didn't bury his voice, they wore it like a chain. The page was curled with sweat, not water, not age. Sweat, human, fearful, pressed into the vellum like confession. Entry 14 began with a smudge, a thumbprint, and beneath it, the father's ink. He wrote as if the pen were a needle, short, halting strokes. No loops, no flourish, just scripture or something that once resembled it, broken into syllables and sewn into silence. He did not name the boy, but the boy's spine had been named. Before him, Witold lay prone in the vestry, a sheet pulled over the stone slab where chalices were once polished for Eucharist. The cold bit through the cloth into his bones. His ribs rose in anxious rhythm, chest thin as a choir psalter. His mouth was stitched closed, not with thread, but with obedience. The father's hand trembled as he reached for the needle. Brass, blessed bent at it, passed through the skin just below the scapula. Witold didn't flinch, not anymore. He had screamed only once, on the second psalm. Now, as entry 14 detailed, he only hummed, low and broken, like a funeral procession slowed by snow. The father's tears dropped onto the boy's back, mixing with milk oil, salve and dried hymnal ink. Each drop diluted a letter, blurred a word. The hymn stuttered. He began to sew again. Domini, quae habitat, he whispered, thread drawn through skin, not tied in silence. Each psalm a vertebra. There was a moment when he paused. The bells had begun to ring backwards, as if unblessing the hour. He glanced at the altar, where candle wax trailed like tears down the statue of Saint Apollonia. Her jaw was broken clean from her face. The icon watched without mouth, just eyes. He whispered, "This is how the word lives on." Behind the vestry wall, the ledger cabinet clicked, as if something inside had turned outside. The courtyard birds had ceased their rustling. Even the wind held its breath. The father looked down again. Witold's spine no longer bled. It opened, as if the threads had taught the flesh to listen. Thin ridges of script had begun to raise like welts, but they did not bruise. They sang not aloud, not in air, but somewhere between the bones. He continued, slower now, hands trembling not from age but from recognition. The hymn had changed. It was no longer Psalm 9:1. It was something older. He recognized the shape of it from a dream he was punished for as a child, a shape with no word. The boy exhaled a short gasp. Not pain, memory. The father dropped the needle. It rang against the stone, too sharp, too clear. Witold's back arched slightly, just once, then stilled. One last thread hung loose from the final vertebra. It curled like a question. The father kissed it. "Forgive me," he said. But the words were not spoken in Polish. They were sewn into the silence. He opened the cabinet. The ledger glared. Entry 14, still open, still wet, but the final sentence had already written itself. "And when the hymn ends, the flesh shall echo." He closed the book with a shudder. It moaned, not from weight, but from memory, a sound like teeth clicking. From the altar wall, the cracked icon split further. One flake of red paint dropped to the floor. He did not stay to see where it landed. Outside, the sky had paled to bone, and the bell, just once, rang in reverse. He turned his collar and buried the needle behind the font. He would deny this night, deny the boy, but the thread under his fingernails would not come clean, and beneath his robes, the psalm had already begun to etch itself into his own skin. Not all scripture was meant to be read, he said once, much later, in exile. Some was meant to be remembered, with blood. Entry 14, Whisper Ledger. This record was sealed by the local diocese in 1889. No explanation given. The novices called it the listening room. But Sister Calvera had never heard a single sound inside. The corridor that led to it was narrow, padded, with lime-washed stone that swallowed footsteps and memory. Iron sconces burned low along the wall, their smoke curling toward the vaulted ceiling like mute prayers. No one spoke past the third arch. It was an unspoken rule, passed down like rusted rosaries, or the way the older nuns never looked each other fully in the eyes. By the fourth step, even breath felt like a betrayal. She carried the child's veil in her hands, soft muslin, recently stitched, still holding the scent of lye and ironed starch. Threaded at the hem were 3 knots. Novice Clara had tied them herself. Calvera paused outside the door. She didn't knock. One didn't need to. The room took notice on its own. When she opened it, there was nothing, just the aching hush of dust and walls too thick for sound. The stone was deeper here, as if the abbey had buried this chamber long before it was ever built. No windows, just an empty cot, a water basin, and a single rope pulled through the ceiling, frayed and yellow with damp. No bell at the end. Clara sat in the corner, knees to chest, face turned away. The veil had been removed. Her scalp had been shaved again, the new growth, like a forgotten garden returning to dirt. "Have you prayed?" Calvera asked. The girl didn't move. The silence pressed hard and uneven, like something trying to remember its own name. Calvera stepped further in. Her steps left no echo. She held the veil loosely in her hand now, letting it unfold like a funeral cloth. "There is no sin in doubt," she said, "only in speech." The girl finally turned her head. Her eyes weren't red, but dry, as if she'd been crying inwardly, weeping down her spine and into her lungs. "They said the saints bled silence," Clara whispered. Calvera stopped. "Did they?" Her voice was quieter now. She had heard those words before long ago, before she herself had been led to this room, before she'd forgotten her birth name. Clara nodded, eyes fixed on the rope, and that silence was how they were saved. A long pause, then, saved from what? Clara didn't answer. Her gaze remained upward. Calvera followed it. The rope, she now saw, led to a cavity, an attic, or hidden bell tower sealed long ago. She had never noticed it before. She looked back to the girl and found herself saying, without thought, "That bell hasn't rung in 40 years. How do you know?" Calvera blinked. The answer came too easily. "Because I was here when it stopped." She had never said that aloud, not even in confession. The memory rippled through her sickly and warm, like milk turned. Her own time in the chamber. The walls darker then. The cot soaked with salt water and scripture. A priest standing at the threshold, saying, "Only, when the soul is loud, the mouth must shut." There had been another girl, Agnes Noonora. She'd spoken too much in her sleep, named saints that had never lived, described wounds that weren't hers. The rope had rung for her, once, then never again. Calvera looked back to Clara, and suddenly the veil in her hand felt wrong, too clean, too eager. "You're not here for punishment," she said, as if to herself. Clara shifted. "Then why am I here?" "Because your voice unsettles them." The girl smiled faintly, not with joy, with understanding. "I dreamt of the Virgin," she said, but her mouth was sewn shut. She was holding a book, but the pages were wet. Calvera stepped back. Something in her chest throbbed, a long-forgotten ache, buried beneath years of penance and muted obedience. "She told me to scream," Clara added, "but only inward." Outside, a wind picked up. The sconces flickered. A sound echoed faintly, metal on metal, as if a bell had shifted in its sleep. Calvera's fingers tightened on the veil. Her lips moved, forming a prayer, but no words came. "I think," Clara said softly, "they're not afraid of our sins, just our voices." Calvera sat beside her then. Against every rule she remembered, she let her back rest against the cold wall. She closed her eyes and listened. For the first time, she heard it. Not voices, not cries. Breath, dozens of them, old, thin, overlapping like a congregation exhaling the truth they were never allowed to speak. She opened her eyes. "There are others still here." Clara nodded. They listened for the veil. What veil? The one that tears when someone finally says the wrong thing. A silence fell again, thicker, almost tangible. Calvera reached out and placed the veil over Clara's knees, not to cover, but to return. "You will not be left here," she said. Clara looked down at the veil, touched the knots. "3, she whispered, "one for each vow, poverty, chastity, and silence." Calvera finished. They both looked up. The rope swayed gently now, though no wind touched it. Dust fell in a slow spiral, like snowfall caught in candlelight. In the silence, Calvera heard something loosen, not in the room, but inside her. A hymn, not sung, remembered. She stood and walked to the wall, ran her fingers over the mortar. Beneath it, faintly, were marking scratched letters, half effaced. We listened to long. Behind her, Clara began to hum, a single note, held just below hearing. A lullaby Calvera hadn't heard since she still had fingernails clean enough to hold her mother's hand. She turned, slowly, her voice dry but firm. "We don't leave through the door." Clara rose. "Then where?" Calvera looked up at the rope, through what never opened. They stood beneath it together, two figures in the middle of the hollow chapel, one holding silence like an heirloom, the other, remembering how to speak. Outside the chamber, bells tolled for none. Inside, no sound. Just breath, and a single low creak above them, like old timber shifting beneath an unseen weight. The rope twitched, somewhere beyond the ceiling. A bell that had not rung in 40 years opened its throat, and exhaled. They didn't scream, they listened, and in that listening, the silence shattered. Silence is the loudest hymn in a hollow chapel. By the time the last door closed, above them, the air already tasted old. Jonah went first. He always did. Cameras steady, light, clipped to the shoulder of his coat like a dying eye. They descended in silence, feet brushing loose plaster, boots soft against the mold-streaked stone. The cellar had been sealed since the fire, but the locks were polished, no rust, just ash dot behind him. Elsie adjusted the audio pack strapped to her chest, eyes flicking to the wavering candle Jonah had insisted on lighting for atmospheric contrast. "Battery's full," she said quietly, mostly to herself. Hector, always last, shut the final hatch and exhaled a wordless breath. A century ago, this basement held crates of wine, then orphans, then nothing. The stairs sighed beneath them. The hallway below was narrow stone on one side, soil on the other. Shovels hung like relics from rusted nails, their blades warped. As the group moved forward, the flame flickered sideways, pulling Jonah's eye to an alcove that hadn't been in the original floor plan. He paused, raised the camera. The lens whined as it focused. "What is that?" Elsie murmured. Inside the recess, melted candles stood in a tight circle, 6 of them, or what had once been candles. Now, the wax had warped upward in the shape of fingers, reaching, clasping, palm-shaped bases, as if someone had molded them around bone. Jonah zoomed in. Drip by drip, the wax had hardened into grasp. He knelt and whispered, "They shaped them to remember." "Remember what?" Hector asked. Jonah didn't answer. The wax was yellow-dulled, but not ancient. Still faintly sweet, like tallow mixed with soap. A scent lingered, milk and soot. The cellar suddenly felt smaller. They moved on. The walls bore scratches, not letters, just arcs, swings, repetitions, scraped into the limestone like a child's unfinished story. Jonah trailed his fingers along them, absently humming the hymn they'd found in the ledger. "Upstairs, blessed be the mouth that keeps." "Stop humming," Elsie said sharply. Jonah blinked. "Wasn't." They paused. Silence pressed in like timidity, then light footsteps. Farther in. They weren't alone. The camera light stuttered. Elsie swore and tapped the side of the pack. The candle flared in the sudden dark, casting dancing shadows on the ceiling, shapes like cribs, like veils stitched shut. Then a sound, humming dot, backwards. It rose from the corridor ahead, winding through the cold like breath on glass. Children's voices, soft and wrong, syllables bent in reverse. "They're playing it backwards," Hector whispered. The hymn. Jonah took a step. The candle bobbed. Wax dripped across his knuckles. He didn't feel it. They entered the final room. Once a root cellar, low ceiling, stone trough, blackened crucifix. In the corner a pile of candlesticks, or limbs, hardened wax over wire and cloth. Fingers curled as if in sleep. Jonah raised the camera. "Don't," Elsie said. Too late. The lens focused. The audio picked up a faint scratching, not mechanical, rhythmic, like teeth on wood. In the far left of the frame, movement. A figure, small, standing, facing the wall. Jonah froze. The candle tipped in his hand. It landed wax first onto the dirt floor, extinguishing in a hiss. The darkness rushed in like water. Hector turned on his flashlight. Nothing, no figure, just damp stone. The smell of mildew thickened, but Jonah's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I saw her," he muttered. "She was humming." Elsie checked the camera. The screen flickered. The time stamp rolled back 12 seconds. The battery bar twitched. "She never turned," Jonah added. "Just stood there." "Her hands, what about her hands?" Hector asked. Jonah raised his palm. Wax pooled and hardened. Fingers locked. Half closed. The lights went out again. But the humming didn't stop. It filled the room, layered, staggered. Children's voices, but not alive, not distant, either. Too close, as if humming into the ears. Jonah stepped back and hit something. Soft. He turned. A veil hung from the ceiling, heavy, wet, threads stained crimson, stitching visible, some of it human hair. He reached out. It clung to his fingers when he touched it. A drop fell from the hem. Milk, or candle fat, or both. Then came the breath, not his spots, not theirs. Low, damp, a sigh directly into his neck. Jonah turned the camera, fast. Behind him, nothing. He ran. The audio recorder dropped from Elsie's chest and cracked. Static hissed out, layered with the distorted lullaby. Hector grabbed her hand, and they followed the fleeing beam of Jonah's light. But halfway down the corridor, his candle stopped moving. His light remained. Jonah didn't. They reached the wax circle. The hand candles were gone in their place. 6 impressions in the dirt, kneeling, child-sized, facing inward. The camera lay on the floor, still recording. Its lens caught only the ceiling. Damp, cracked, mold blooming in the shape of wings. Hector picked it up. Where did he go? Elsie didn't speak. Her eyes were on the alcove. Something glistened at the edge of the shadows, still melting. A seventh candle forming slowly in the shape of a clenched hand. Jonah's ring was fused to the wrist. Hector turned toward her. We need to go now. But the door behind them had sealed. Not locked. Gone. The wall was smooth where they had entered, as if nothing had ever broken it. Elsie reached out, palms trembling, touched the stone it breathed beneath her fingers. Then came the knock, not behind them but inside the wall. A slow, soft knock, then another, as if someone's maw were tapping from within, not frantic, not afraid, rhythmic, like a game. Knock, knock, pause. A backward lullaby hummed in her right ear. She dropped to her knees, hands over her head, sobbing into the stone. He was humming "Blessed be the mouth that keeps," she whispered, but he never stopped. Hector reached for her, then froze. His eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. I know this room. Elsie looked up. He turned slowly, eyes darting across the walls, the markings, the melted wax. I was here when I was a child. You were never. I never told them, he whispered. I never told anyone. A slow, deliberate breath echoed behind them. They turned. The veil was moving again, but there was no wind. Just a shape behind it, rising, no feet, only a suggestion of shoulders, a weightless neck, no face, but hands. So many hands. They were silent now, not in peace, in listening. The candlelight pulsed. The hymn, once reversed, slowed to a crawl, then halted. A final note, held too long, like a dying gasp trapped in a choir's throat. The footage cut. Abruptly, just as Elsie opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came, only wax. Some lullabies are sung to keep us awake. The linen was still damp when they unfolded it. 3 novices, barefoot and veiled, stood in a line beneath the vaulted chapel, hands outstretched, like supplicants awaiting blessing or punishment. The ritual had no script, only rhythm. The bell had been silenced weeks prior. They were to listen now, not speak. Sister Larace moved first, the hem of her habit soaked in cellar mildew, her fingers shaking just enough to betray memory. In her left hand, a bowl of warm milk. In her right, a silver pinlong, clean, glinting beneath a half-moon window stained with red glass. The light filtered through like blood held in water. She dipped the needle. The milk clung to it, forming a pale skin. Then she pierced. The girl did not cry out. She only bowed her head, the sound of her breath shallow and quick, like pages rifled through by wind. The thread, a coarse, grey yarn soaked in diluted ink, followed, pulled through the flesh of her palm, from one side to the other. A hymn was hummed and odd sung. Every stitch was a prayer. Every prayer was a wound. They began the clothwork that the diary had instructed. 5 stitches per palm, each wordless, each mirrored. 1 stitch for obedience, 1 for silence, 1 for womb, 1 for veil, 1 for sleep. Sister Larace watched the girls thread themselves into scripture. The cloth trembled in their hands, their blood not red, but pale pink in the milk-soap. Fibers seeped slowly, forming shapes like hymnal bars. The chapel floor smelled of iron, old candle wax, and pressed salt. Larace turned to the second novice. The girl's eyes were closed. "Do you offer?" she asked. The girl nodded once. Another. "Dip." Another piercing. This time the blood came faster. Larace did not falter. Thread through. Pull. Tie knot. The light above them shifted. A passing cloud, perhaps, or something darker moving across the stained glass, muting the crimson hue. For a moment, the girls looked grey, as if already embalmed. Larace's eyes flicked to the crucifix. Its mouth was cracked. The third novice waited. Her name was Clara, though she had not spoken it since her arrival. The Mother Superior had warned Larace of her. Vivid dreams, stigmata-like scratching, recitations of hymns never taught. Clara stepped forward, no fear in her step. Larace reached for the final needle, the one set apart, longer, older, blackened at the tip. It had been found buried in the cellar wall, wrapped in cloth that smelled of milk and mold. As she lifted it, the candle beside her sputtered. Wax spilled onto the altar. Larace dipped it, slower this time. The milk recoiled. A thin skin formed atop the bowl. Like breath, like waiting. "Palm," she whispered. Clara opened her hand. Larace hesitated. Something pulsed beneath the skin just under the surface. A blue vein or something else. She pressed lightly. The girl did not flinch. She pierced. The moment that Needle slid through. The chapel changed. The humming halted. All three novices raised their heads in unison. Lorace's breath caught. The blood was not pink. It was clear, not water, not milk. Something colder. The thread snagged, refused the second pull. She tried again. The cloth jerked from Clara's other hand and fell to the floor, landing on the stained stones with a soft hiss. The ink bled outward in perfect circles, spelling nothing but containing something. A sound filled the chapel. Scraping, not from the girls, from the walls, behind the altar, beneath the floor, beyond the veil, like nails on old stone, or teeth dragged across bone. Lorace looked up. The icons on the walls had shifted. Their eyes turned inward, their mouths open, but stitched. Red thread ran from lip to cheek. Silent saints, watching. The novices began to sway. Clara's eyes rolled back, and then she spoke. Not in Latin, not in tongues, in perfect lucid French. Do you feel him now, under your skin? Lorace stumbled back, needle still in hand. Trembling, the bowl of milk tipped. It spilled across the embroidered cloth, unmaking the stitches. The ink ran backwards. One of the novices collapsed. The candlelight warped. Shadows climbed the rafters like vines. Clara stepped forward, her stitched palm open, still weeping clear fluid. She raised it to Lorace's cheek and pressed gently. Offered me the needle, she whispered. Lorace felt it then. Not pain. Weight. Inside her, like something had moved. She gasped. Something pulled behind her ribs, not her heart. Something older. The bell outside the chapel rang. No rope had touched it. The floor beneath the altar groaned. Law. CE dropped the needle. It landed tip down into the cloth and stood. Frozen. Impossible. The cloth began to burn. No flame, just heat. It blackened in silence, curling inward like a letter. Read too many times. The words disappeared. So did the stains, until there was only a single line left behind, stitched into the border in blood thread. He moves beneath the veils. Lorace backed away. Clara did not follow. The other two novices had vanished. No footsteps, no breath, just veils folded neatly on the pews, damp with sweat. The air grew colder. She turned toward the sacristy door. It would not open. Lorace looked to the statue of St. Calix. Its head was bowed, but now the eyelids were gone. The sockets stared out, hollow and aware. The diary on the altar had opened to a new page. Fresh ink. No pen in sight. Just a single question written in a shaky hand. Do you feel him now, under your skin? She touched her chest. The stitch was there, beneath the flesh. Burning. She fell to her knees, hands in her lap, mouth open in a scream. She didn't let out. The candle-guttered darkness gathered like clergy, and the last thing Lorace saw before the veil dropped over her vision was Clara, walking backward toward the altar. Arms raised, thread trailing from her palms like leashes. Every stitch was a prayer. Every prayer was a wound. The ink bled before the quill touched parchment. It oozed from the tip like something already written, eager, too old to wait. Father Malik watched it drip onto the parchment with the reverence of a surgeon watching the first bead of blood. His hands, once tremulous, now shook with memory. Not age, not fear. Memory. The cell was colder than usual. Candles sputtered without wind. The wall beside him bore the dark smudge of a child's palm, pressed there decades ago, still wet. Somehow, the journal rested atop a folded altar cloth, white, but yellowing where his wrists had stained it nightly. He dipped the quill again, not into ink, into his thumb. He had opened it earlier with a shaving blade, a thin, clean wound, the kind that girls had once been taught to make, quietly, prayerfully. The quill trembled. He began to write. To the keeper of keys, the title they gave him in secrecy. Not father, not priest. That was for daylight. The name they whispered in veiled silence was what mattered. He paused, looked to the shuttered window. Frost curled in patterns like veins across the glass. Outside, snow whispered across the courtyard like old confessions never granted absolution. He continued. It was not doctrine that made me do it. It was not faith. It was longing, dressed as virtue, and fear, stitched into robes. His hand cramped. He unclenched it and let the blood swell up again. On the far wall, the crucifix had no Christ. Only the nails remained. They'd removed the body decades ago, when the first girl spoke in tongues she'd never been taught. It had been deemed invitation. The absence of the figure was meant to rebuke the unworthy. Now, it simply watched him. Empty. He wrote faster. It began with 1. Her name no names. Names are seeds. And I have buried too many. The candlelight caught on the metal of the sewing tin beside him. Inside, 10 needles lay on linen soaked in milk. One had rusted entirely black. The others gleamed like teeth in a sleeping mouth. The tin read, Psalm work. He touched the lid. Psalm work, that was what they called it. Stitching the scripture into silence. Not ink, not voice, but skin vine work. He remembered the first time, how soft her palm had been, how still, how the blood ran so neatly through the cotton. They told him it was obedience, but he had not done it for her. He'd done it for himself too. Stop the voices, to halt the thoughts that came in the dark between vespers and matins, the ones that called to him in the lilt of girlhood. He took the blade, pressed it gently across the base of his palm. A line opened. He whispered the old words, Blessed be the Word made flesh, and then, the needle. He slid it through. Slow. The pain made him feel righteous again. The thread followed, thin, damp with milk and ash. It tugged. He tied the knot against bone across. From him, the corner of the room breathed, not moved. Breathed. Breathed. The bricks swelled slightly, like lungs behind stone. He didn't look. He knew it was the same place she had been buried beneath the floor, behind the loose tile. Her final stitch, unfinished. Her hymn unsung. He had promised never to say her name, but it scratched now at the back of his teeth. He turned the page. The blood smeared the parchment in crescents, accidental half-moons. He wrote, It is better to stitch the word into them, than let their mouths speak blasphemy. His hand began to seize. He dropped the quill. From the sewing tin, one needle rolled free. It fell to the floor with a sound like a door latching. He tried to stand. The robe tangled around his ankles. He collapsed hard onto the flagstone, shoulder cracking against the corner of the altar. One candle extinguished from the gust of his fall. The others flickered. Shapes danced along the ceiling spindly, reaching, childlike. He crawled to the wall, pressed his forehead to the tile where she was buried. I did it for God, he whispered. The wall was warm, too warm. He pressed harder. The tile cracked slightly. Milk seeped through the gap. He gasped. It smelled sweet. Then the humming began, not from behind the wall, from beneath his skin, low at first, then louder. The flesh gospel. That's what they called it, in private, a heresy, disguised as holiness, verses sung in thread. Scripture bled from palm to altar. The girls had sung it without mouths, stitches across lips, but still the melody leaked. He reached for the candle, but it melted entirely, not wax. Fat. His vision blurred. Across the room, the crucifix nails began to drip, rust. He wept. I never touched them, he pleaded to no one. A whisper from the bricks answered, But you watched. He slammed his fist into the tile that gave. A hole opened small, just wide enough for a breath, or a hand. He leaned close. The darkness within pulsed. Then small fingers emerged, not decayed, not cold. Living. They pressed against his face, gentle, forgiving, then tightened. One finger slid. Beneath his eyelid he screamed, but no sound came. Only blood, only scripture. It spilled from his mouth in verses, never taught aloud, and the womb became word, and the word knew pain, and pain knew silence. He writhed, and then lay still. The candlelight dimmed to memory. The journal remained open, one line unfinished. Beside it, a smear of blood shaped like a handprint with 7 fingers. Blasphemy doesn't stain the mouth. It stains the hands that silence it. Dust settled like breath along the rafters of the ruined choir loft, and beneath it, sound waited thin, brittle, patient. It was February of 1962. 2 men and a reel-to-reel recorder stood beneath the ribcage of the chapel ceiling. One lit a cigarette. The other adjusted his headphones and pressed the red button. They had been sent by the Archdiocese for acoustic study. The choir's ceiling had warped, they'd said. Water damage. Decades of hymns stored too tightly in stone. But no one mentioned the girls. The technician closest to the altar, Roland, adjusted the boom mic's arm. His fingers brushed against the length of knotted linen, half buried in plaster dust. He didn't notice the milk-white stain that seeped along its edge. His partner, Jennings, remained near the entry arch, scribbling notations. He was humming. He didn't know why. The mic picked up static, then something else, a sound not unlike fabric being torn in reverse. The men froze, not from fear but from Recognition. It was a lullaby, faint, measured, 14 voices, all girls. Each line was sung with a breath just too slow for life. Notes lingered, unnatural, as though echoing from lungs that no longer opened or had never closed. No instrument accompanied them, only the creak of warped pews and the soft clink of something metallic falling in intervals like needles dropped into bowls. The candles the crew had lit began to lean. The wax bled sideways. Jennings turned toward the far choir gate. "Did you hear that?" he asked. But Roland was pale, mouth slightly parted. I think it's live. No one's here. They're not in the room." Roland slowly rotated the dial. The pitch didn't shift. The singing was not recorded. It existed only in the now. A breeze passed, though the air was still. The veil above the altar rippled beneath it. Nothing, only the cloth-covered dais, where novices once knelt to receive blessings of silence, of obedience, of sealing. Roland stepped closer. The recorder hissed. Then, they didn't bury her name. They baptized it. Not sung, spoken. A girl's voice. Clear. Young. He dropped his clipboard. Jennings stepped forward, holding his hand up as if to stop time itself. The singing continued. The lullaby's final line trembled on a single note, then silence. The mic swung slightly to the left, not from air, from weight. Jennings moved to recenter it. His fingers brushed it. The tape stopped. In the stillness, a scraping began. Not loud, intimate, like a hand pulled across wool, or a fingernail dragged across embroidered letters. Roland saw it first. A shadow, folded in the corner beneath the crucifix. Its posture was wrong. Knees tucked, head lowered, arms outstretched in a way that mimicked supplication but mirrored restraint. The shape was not there before. It lifted its head. No. Face only a veil stitched to skin. Roland stepped back. The tape began again, but it did not replay. It continued. Now, the lullaby was reversed. Every note re-swallowed. Every breath inhaled. The tearing cloth sound returned. Only louder. From beneath the floor. The tiles near the altar began to pulse. Milk bubbled up from the cracks. A thread gray and wet coiled out like a tongue. Jennings stumbled toward the door. It didn't open. Roland, he whispered. Stop the tape. But Roland was kneeling, mouth open, eyes weeping without blinking. He saw them, all 14. Not in flesh, but in form. They stood in the pews. Each wore the same veil, the same damp robe, the same stitched palms. None moved, but they breathed. Through him, his chest rose and fell in time with theirs. Jennings backed toward the confessional booth. Its curtain fluttered open before he touched it. Inside, a recorder sat already running. The tape was warm. Still spinning. The girl's lullaby was on loop. Except now there were 15 voices. He slammed the lid shut. The lullaby stopped, but the cloth tearing returned this time. He heard the scream beneath it. It wasn't a voice, it was memory. A breath held too long, a cry smothered too young. He turned back to Roland. Only the mic remained, and a linen veil, damp, folded, neatly stitched with red thread at the corner. No body, no scream. Only breath. He ran. The church did not stop him, but outside, the snow did not fall. It rose. Carrying ash. From under the earth. Their song isn't finished. It waits for more voices. He arrived in a wool coat, still wet from the train. Salt pouch tied around his neck, like a relic from another kind of war. Father Yosef had not spoken since leaving Krakow. That was the first instruction. No speech until the air beneath the chapel had been swallowed in ash. The second, salt under tongue, never spit, never swallowed. He obeyed. The chapel doors did not creak. They sighed, like breath held since a time when breath had shape. Dust in this place didn't rise. It waited. The 3 men with him were younger, their collars stiff with starch, rosaries looped like nooses down their ribs. They lit their lanterns too quickly. Light shouldn't rush in where the dead still counted. They descended, past the vestry, past the cells with doors too narrow for escape, past the cracked icon of Saint Cecilia, eyes gouged, not by time, but by thumb, past the crochet stuffed with lambskin and the crib that still smelled of burnt milk. They came to the chapel cellar. Each man placed a grain of salt beneath. His tongue. The floor had been swept recently, but not by hand. Lines curved across the soot like something had dragged its own body through centuries of silence. A hymnal lay in the center open, water-warped, pages red, not with ink but rusted script. One name repeated on each staff line. Agatha. A wind passed through a room with no windows. The youngest priest, Micah, blinked rapidly and looked upward, not in prayer, in listening. Yosef reached for him. Too late. Micah opened his mouth. No words came, only breath. Then sound, low, not his voice, nor that of any known tongue. A child's hum layered over a woman's scream. A harmony sung backward. The salt slipped from Micah's mouth. He fell sideways into the circle of hymnals. His jaw trembled but did not move. His eyes stayed open as if to remember something even God would not. Yosef crossed himself, spoke nothing. He motioned to the others. They began the ritual. Each man placed his palm against the stone and bled through their cuffs. The cellar was greedy. Their blood vanished upon touching the floor. Candles flickered, not from wind, from breath, and still no one exhaled. The veil in the corner, once used to drape new novices during fasting, began to rise. It did not float, it arched, as though a head beneath it lifted in praise or protest. Yosef dared a step forward. His lantern cast a soft glow over the veil. Beneath it, a hymnal open, a tongue sewn into the spine, its root pressed between pages like a withered flower. It pulsed. The eldest priest beside him gagged but did not scream. He bit down hard enough to break a tooth. The salt in his mouth hissed like a serpent, dissolving too fast. The veil dropped. A second hum began. This time the voices sounded closer. Yosef dropped to his knees. He did not pray. He remembered the girl. In 1908, the one who wrote in milk instead of ink. The one who sang during storms and was punished for it. The one they said had split her soul with melody. The one he watched buried under the altar. She was not quiet now. The cellar trembled. From behind the stone walls, chains rattled not in fear, but rhythm. Micah's body twitched once. His lips moved. He was singing. In reverse. Salt spilled from his tongue. He began to rise. Bones wrong. Posture broken. But the voice still came. I do not know this, one priest whispered. But the cellar did. It sang back with each note. One candle blew out. The flame curled inward like a dying eye. The veil rose again. Not slow. Not mythic. Sudden underneath. A new hymnal. Closed. Wet. Its edges stitched shut. They had seen this before. Father Yosef reached for the thread. His fingers burned. Not metaphor burned. He staggered back. Blood on his fingertips bubbled like wax. His tongue ached. Not with heat, with pressure. As if something beneath it fought to rise. He pressed salt harder into his mouth. The chanting swelled. The floor cracked. A name poured through the fissure. Not spoken, breathed. Agatha. And another. Joseph. Then his own Yosef. He fell. No arms outstretched. No scream, only salt scattering across the stone like shattered glass. Silence returned. The lanterns extinguished, except one, flickering dimly beside the opened hymnal, its thread now loosened. Pages unspoling. Each line handwritten. Each note a memory. Each name familiar, except the last. The last entry read. He sang. And next to it, stitched into the margin, his tongue, curled, preserved, still glistening beside it. Someone had written, salt does not stop sound, it only seasons it. The pit was shallower than the plan suggested, measured in bone rather than stone. It took the team 3 days to break through the slab, and another 4 to realize the floor had never truly sealed. Beneath the choir loft, beneath the boards warped by time and him, the pit yawned open like a held breath, finally exhaled. Dr. Imani Rahim wiped her brow with a glove thick with chalk dust and stared into the dark soil below. The blue flags marked every bone fragment recovered. She counted 13, then 14, then another. Kyle, the youngest on her team, pointed. What emerged wasn't a full bone, but something softer, rounder, a tooth. Small. Root intact. She turned it gently in her hand. Not adult, not decayed, not even erupted fully. Milktooth, she said, too quietly. They catalogued each one. They stopped counting at 63. That night, the lights failed. Their halogens flickered not in stutter, but rhythm. The pattern didn't match any electrical fault. It matched music, specifically, lullaby. Imani said it before she believed it. She hadn't told anyone yet about what she heard the first night. A hum beneath the choir bench, low, wet, like sound vibrating through cloth. She hadn't told anyone that she'd found 2 rosary beads in her tent this morning, neither hers. Still slick with something sweet and sour, like spoiled milk. By the third day, they cleared the pit. What remained wasn't a grave, it was a mouth. The pit's interior walls had been lipped with hymnals, stitched shut, thread yellowed, some unraveling. She reached for the one nearest the bottom, hesitated. Each hymnal had a child's name carved faintly into the leather. Agnes, Rosa, Miriam. One had no name at all. That's the one she opened. The pages fell out like baby teeth. Each page had a single drawing, a mouth sewn closed, another, a tongue split, labeled disobedience, another, a child kneeling, rope looped not around neck or wrist, but mouth. A final page, the words milk teeth are gifts returned to God. That night, Kyle screamed in his sleep. He woke with a tooth in his palm. He didn't remember how. It got there by the 5th day. Dr. Rahim demanded DNA sequencing. The report came back incomplete. 14 sequences matched those of the known novices lost in 1887. All girls, all names confirmed. The 15th had no corresponding file. Female, age estimate, 5. No dental eruption beyond first molars. Imani stared at the printout until it blurred. There had been no novices under age 7 in the registry. She'd checked. She'd asked the archivists. One said a line in the old hymn book might have hinted at a silent one too young to sing, but placed to soften the others. Imani didn't speak for the rest of the day. The team began finding more teeth, not scattered, arranged, in a circle surrounding the place where the choir would have stood, like a wreath, or a warning. Each morning, one more appeared. By the 6th day, Kyle was gone. His sleeping bag remained, torn open at the center seam, not the zipper, like something had emerged. A note was found pinned to the choir bench. No ink, just pressure, against parchment. When held to the light, it read, "She still can't sing, but she listens." The dig continued in silence. Imani taped her mouth shut that night, not out of fear, out of instinct. She dreamed of a veil being pulled back, not from a face but from a crib. The child inside had no mouth, just polished teeth arranged like rosary beads across the gums. The dream ended with her holding one in her hand. It melted the next morning. Her own molar ached. Imani touched it with her tongue. It wiggled. Later, beneath the platform they uncovered a hand-drawn floor plan, not present in any archive. It mapped a lower chamber, directly beneath the pit. She followed it, wood panels lifted with unnatural ease. Below, darkness pooled like ink. Her lantern lit the descent. Stone steps curved inward, narrowing like a throat at the bottom. A slab, white upon it dashed teeth, each arranged into a shape, not a sigil, a mouth, half open. Inside, a child's hymnal, bound in thin leather. It opened to a single page. Dr. Rahim read it aloud. She didn't mean to, but her lips moved. The words burned in her throat, then turned cold. They didn't bury her name. They baptized it. A sound rose round her. Not quite song, not quite breath. Like the clicking of teeth against wood. Like a choir warming its voice. She dropped the hymnal, but the page turned again. The final line glowed faintly, revealed only under the sweat of her fingers. One more voice completes the song. She climbed back up. Salt on her tongue, and a tooth in her palm. Not hers. Not yet. She placed it gently with the others. The lights flickered. Again, no stutter, just rhythm. Lullaby. And beneath her feet, the sound of something shifting, not in death, but in listening. The pit remained open, waiting, and in the file delivered later, that WEEK. This record was sealed by the local diocese in 1889. No explanation given. Rain began as a whisper through the rafters, soft enough to be mistaken for breath. But as the wind thickened and the storm gathered its weight, the chapel exhaled for the first time in decades. Dr. Imani Rahim stood at the edge of the choir pit, soaked to the bone. Mud splashed high across her boots. The stitched diary was open in her hands, its cloth pages blooming in the damp like something still living. She had read it 6 times. Still, her eyes fell to the final line. Each thread, lettered in dried blood and linen, "Amen is not an end. It is the thread between breaths." Her hands trembled, not from cold, but memory. She hadn't meant to come back. After the dig was shut down, after the Vatican called, after the university pulled funding, after Kyle's name was wiped from the records, and her own credentials quietly reconsidered, she hadn't meant to come back. But some silences don't end in forgetting, they end in return. Lightning cracked. The stained glass above the nave burst inward in fractured color. Shards landed like petals on the altar cloth. A virgin's face bled blue and gold down the broken wall. From behind the altar came the smell again, milk and rot, and something beneath that, something warm, wet, like something exhaled too long beneath the earth. She took another step toward the pit. Water leaked through the choir floor now, seeping from beneath the boards. Not rainwater, thicker, white, coating her soles. Her heel landed on something hard. She looked down. A tooth. Her breath caught. Not old, not fossilized, new. She didn't pick it up. The walls moaned, long and low. Not the wind would. Remembering, a hymnal, untouched since the collapse, had floated from the side pew. Its pages were opening in rhythm, slowly, as if someone turned them with invisible fingers. With each page, the hum returned. That same lullaby, half melody, half ache. Laudate. Sanctae. Puellae. A child's voice joined, then another, too high to be alive, too precise to be echo. The stitched diary fluttered in her hand. Another voice, lower now, male, familiar. Imani turned. At the pulpit stood Father Moloch's portrait, once hidden behind veils in the vestry, now freed by the wind. Its eyes had once been painted shut, the lids stitched in oil. Now they were open, or rather, missing, where his eyes should have been. Two ovals carved out, black and wet, leaking soot down the frame, lightning again. This time, not white but red. The stained glass above the altar glowed from within, not by storm but by flame. The choir pit pulsed with heat. Then, the earth opened, not like a mouth, like a lung. It breathed. Imani stepped back. Something rose from the pit. Cloth, sewn in spirals, silk veils, stained with milk, rosaries, threaded into hemline, a face beneath small, genderless, mouth stitched with black thread. The eyes blinked once, then bled. Imani did not scream. She opened the diary again. The last page was no longer the last. A new patch had been sewn while she looked away. The thread was still damp. It read, "You are the final voice." She felt the pressure in her throat rise, a note, not song, not scream, something between the two. She clamped her jaw shut. The figure moved. It didn't walk. It slid, like wax melting forward, veil dragging behind. The hymn grew louder. Agnus Dei, qui tol is ... peccata ... Each line formed from mouths no longer alive. She heard Kyle, heard Miriam. She heard the silent one. The veiled figure reached the altar, raised a hand. From beneath the cloth sleeve, a baby's fist, clutching a bell. It rang once. All the pews collapsed backward. It rang again. The diary in Imani's hand ignited. No flame, just blackness that crawled like mold, devouring each line, each thread. She held on as long as she could. When it reached her fingers, it did not burn. It stitched. The thread entered her skin like a needle through parchment. She felt the first letter form just beneath her wrist. She did not resist. She understood now. Amen is not the end. It is the thread. A final gust of wind tore through the chapel. The roof cracked. The rafters howled. Dust from forgotten hymnals erupted like pollen. One by one, the stained glass windows shattered, not in, but out. As if something had left, or been born. She stepped into the pit. The milk pooled ankle. The bones below shifted, not from her weight, but in welcome. From beneath the hymnals, voices rose again, now louder, now joined. She opened her mouth, and said it. One word, not screamed, not whispered, just given. Amen. The chapel collapsed, not with thunder, but with choir. When the rescue team arrived 3 days later, they found nothing. No roof, no pews, no bones, only a pit filled with milk, and above it, 14 veils caught in the tree, branches dripping rain and soot. No record of the diary remained, only a single cloth scrap burned into the pulpit's base. The thread still pulsed faintly, as if it awaited the final stitch, and deep beneath the soil, past the roots and brick, a sound continued, not quite a hymn, not quite a cry, but something between, and it did not end.